Okay, so I have my house here, and what I'm going to do is check the overall width of the house from outside of the wall to outside the wall, and that's 2 feet. So I know I have 1 foot to the center of the house for my run. That gets me to the center, and then for my overhang horizontally, that's like 6 1/4 is what it is. So if I want to go and make more rafters for this, I need to know those numbers, and I also need to know the pitch of the roof. So if I go and draw a plumb line straight down, I can go and I can check that with my rafter square. Wherever I trace here becomes the plumb line. So I'm going to tip this up and match my plumb line here that's existing to find out what angle this was at. So I have my pivot at the top. That's where I'm pivoting. And I'm matching this edge here with the plumb line. And now that I have that lined up, I just read down this top edge of the board where I pivoted to where it says common. That's a 7. See how that 7 is lined up on the same edge that I'm pivoting on? That's a 7/12 roof pitch, which means for every 7 inches we go up, we go 12 inches over. Or for every 7 feet we go up, we go 12 feet over. 7/12 for my roof pitch. So I can do the same thing on here. I can do the same angle. So I can go and take my pivot, and I can tip it until I see a common 7. So I'm going to tip that to common 7 using that same pivot point. And if I trace this edge here, that becomes my plumb line. We're going to call that the rafter tail. So that's going to be right here. Then we're going to come over 6 1/4 and start our heel cut. So to come over 6 1/4, I could continue to use this rafter square, but actually I prefer that you use this rafter square, right? Our speed square is also called a rafter square, but this one is truly a rafter square. And so for this rafter square to work, we want to come up with the blade to our height of 7, and then we want to come over for our run of 12. And so to do that on here, I can go off the bottom edge to bottom edge. Here's 12 from the outside to 7 on the outside. I'm going to match it up on the bottom. So here you can see that when 12 is matched up on the bottom edge and 7 is matched up on the bottom edge, I get the same angled line, 7/12 pitch. Now I can come 90 degrees out of that to get horizontal. So I want to go horizontally from this line 6 1/4 inches. And so with this on here, right, I want to come out 6 1/4 inches. So here you can see that I'm on my line, and on the blade, I'm going to come out 6 1/4. And that becomes where my heel cut starts, right? And now that heel cut is 1.5 inches high, which I have labeled on here. That's my tail cut. This piece is being removed. I'm going to come over 6 1/4. I have to translate 7/12 pitch, so 7, 12, lining up on the bottom edge, trace that up. That's my line. I got ahead of myself before. That's my line. Now I do my heel cut up 1.5 inches coming out. So I'm going to measure up 1.5 inches on that line. 1.5 inches, make my mark. 1.5 inches up, and I'm going to come out. That's my heel cut, or my bird's mouth cut. So now you can see how that overlays on there, right? All this is going to be removed, and this is going to be removed. And then we need our ridge cut. So we had said from where the wall starts over is 12 inches to the center of this ridge beam. So if I measure up on here and I put this right up against that plumb line, I can come over 12 and that would get me it. So I might want to just place this right on this line and look over where 12 is horizontally, and that becomes the center of my ridge beam, right? Now that would be in the way if I cut it straight there. So I'm going to have to measure, and I'm going to have to mark that line. So I'm going to go this way this time. 7, 12. So 12 is on the top edge, outside, 7 is on the top edge. Slide it until I see my mark. 12 inches of run, 7 inches of rise, gets me the right angle for this plumb line. This plumb line is just for telling me where the center of that ridge is. Right, you can see that. And now I have to subtract out 3/4 of an inch this way, and all that's going to be cut off. So 3/4 of an inch coming horizontally We're just going to use this to ride the line. 3/4 of an inch. Let's see, that's a half. That's 1 inch. So in between half and 1 inch is 3/4. And then that line becomes my new plumb line. So here's 7 inches, reading the top edge, outside, outside. At the tip up 12. So 12 is reading the top edge, outside, outside, 7. Put it on the mark. Trace that line. This goes away. All of this gets cut out. Now that's my ridge cut, which is a plumb cut. So you see all these different plumb cuts have different names. The top one, plumb cut, is called a ridge cut. Cut here is called a heel cut. The perpendicular one to it is called a seat cut. So that's our seat. Then we have the tail cut, which is also a plumb cut. So now that we're ready to cut this, I'm gonna go and hang off my board, and I'm gonna take a nibble. And so I see that I'm good. So I'm gonna kind of go back in that notch for a second and then back it off a hair. So I have my ridge cut. And then now I have my tail cut. Keep your hand 6 inches away. Look at the notch, look in the window, take a nibble. Okay, there you saw it twisted a little bit, came back. So there we go. And then now we have the bird's mouth cut to make out of there. So to do that, you can do that by hand, or you can get started with the circular saw. So right now, the way this is, it's a little small, so it doesn't feel that safe to be able to make the cut. So I'm gonna do this one by hand, and it's typically how we finish these guys off anyways. So I'm gonna go and grab a handsaw, and then we can make this pretty safely with the handsaw. We also can use the circular saw if this board was longer, right? This is a pretty tiny roof rafter because we're using a pretty tiny demonstration here. But if it was made off a bigger board, for those we all cut with a circular saw. And you usually finish them with the handsaw anyways. So I'm gonna do a couple backstrokes here. And then once I have my channel, then I can just start sawing it up. And I'm gonna actually get on a little bit lower of a work surface, so it's a little more comfortable. Of course, I grabbed the saw blade that's all rusty. And then now I need to get this one. So I'm gonna do a couple back cuts. So this blade is definitely dull, so I'm gonna grab a different one. But you can kind of see how we're getting going here. Now, if I did want to use the circular saw, I can show you how we would do that too. So I can throw in a couple nails to just tack this in place so it doesn't move on me. And then I can cut this by hand with the circular saw as well. So to tack this guy in, don't put the nail all the way in, and then keep in mind where the saw might be. So we want to make sure that this is sticking past where we want to cut. This one I probably have to put all the way in, so it's not in the way. So I used a smaller nail there, larger nail there. And now we can go and make the cut here. You have to overcut a little bit because the saw doesn't cut through the same depth on the bottom because it's a circle. And once you get that, then you do have to handsaw that last little chunk out, or if you have a chisel, you can also chisel that out. So your choice on that. Chisels are pretty sharp, so make sure you don't chisel towards yourself. Always chisel away from you and others. Okay, so now that we have that, you can see how the overcuts helped out, but they don't cut all the way through. And then you have to get that inside corner by hand. And once we have this first piece, all the other pieces become easier because this becomes our template. So you want to make one template, put all the time in, getting it all measured out, calculated out, and then from here, you can just trace onto other boards that you need if you need a whole bunch of them. And that's if everything else is good. Sometimes if the framing that you're going on top of is bad, like the wall framing's not square, then you would have to potentially, if you're the roof guy, you'd want to yell at the wall person and just say, hey, why isn't everything square? Didn't you take geometry and construction? So from here, this would go right on top and it would meet at the ridge, and that's how this would go. Typically your roof framing would stack on top of your wall framing because it keeps the same on center spacing. But if you had a double top plate, you can be anywhere you want on it. If you have a single plate, usually you have to be within like an inch or so to get everything to carry the weight correctly. That's your rafter. Everything should look good. And if that was all good, then you would write template on it and just trace all of your other ones with this. And you go and place them on, right, either direction, placing that on. And that's how you do a rafter.